We're Earth Force. We are a national nonprofit and the home of environmental action civics. In field chats, you'll hear research-based, actionable tips and inspiring stories of youth-adult partnerships that empower young people to become environmental decision makers. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get started.
Cool. Well, Jerry, Jimmy, Alicia, it's so awesome to have you here. We can go around and do some quick introductions. Jimmy, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So Jimmy Stevens, I have been in Southwest Florida for 12 years. I'm originally from Oklahoma. And when I moved to Florida, so I've been teaching Spanish for 29 years. But when I moved to Florida, I was just struck by the beauty, the natural beauty. And it was just nothing like I experienced in Oklahoma. So I just really started getting interested in volunteering, doing all the outdoorsy things. I wanted to hit all the national parks. And then at school, these kids that I'm teaching they're really blessed. And so they didn't need the support that I had needed to give students in Oklahoma. So I'm like, I need to find a way to make this job purposeful, more purposeful than Spanish, and no shade to Spanish. Spanish is great, but I wanted something that I could connect further with kids. So I started doing environmental club, scuba gang, and then I started getting involved with Everglades Foundation and going to Everglades Coalition. And I found out about this amazing, amazing Everglades Champions in action. And it really has, that my involvement in environmental education really has changed my life. Like this chapter of my life is dedicated to getting kids involved in sustainability and just caring about the environment. And it's just been just wonderful.
Awesome. Thanks. Jerry, how about you?
Oh, I want to be in Jimmy's class. That sounds like a lot of fun. Yeah. So I was an earth science teacher here at Wilson Middle School. My background, though, is global sustainability. So 2 years ago, we decided to pilot this idea of an urban agroecology class where students were learning about food production that was sensitive to the environment. And so we started with 3 courses that year, and they filled up really fast. The following year, which was last year, we had a full day of a variety of ag courses: aquaculture, ag communications, and then agriculture foundations. So did I say aquaculture? Can't remember. Anyways, so yeah, and the students just really, really were interested in it. And so we met Alicia through a friend of ours that I was in school with for global sustainability, Bianca, and she told me about the program. We decided to jump in with both feet, and we had so much fun, and the students really, really enjoyed it, and we're able to do some really positive things.
Ooh, I'm excited to ask y'all about your projects, but Alicia, would love to hear from you. Can you tell us a little about who you are, who the Everglades Foundation is, and what is this Everglades Champions that we've been hearing about?
Sure, no problem. My name is Alicia Torres. I work with the Everglades Foundation. I'm on the education team. We started the Everglades Champions in Action program for grades 6 through 12. About 5 years ago, and our goal is to really help young people learn about the Everglades while connecting it to their own experiences and their local community as they develop and practice these skills of citizenship. And so we can't do that without our educators like Jimmy and Jerry. And so we primarily provide the framework for this program with Earth Force support, of course, and provide some professional development training for the teachers so they understand how to implement this model. And then we also provide like one-to-one support for these middle and high school educators. And this program is what we call the Everglades Champions in Action program.
Excellent. Well, I have heard the little bits and pieces that we were chatting before we started recording, but either Jerry or Jimmy, tell us about your project, kind of big headlines in a nutshell. What have y'all been up to with your students?
Go ahead, Jimmy.
Okay, so when we started the process, I thought I had all these ideas about how it was going to go, but then Alicia's voice is in my head saying, no, this is about the kids. And so we did the inventories are kind of where you start, and then you start kicking around ideas for your project. And so we had kids submit ideas, like they had to do a little PowerPoint presentation about their ideas. And they were so good. So we ended up kind of melding 3 ideas together that had to do with native plants and butterflies. And then it literally took flight. So we decided we wanted to promote planting native. Did you see what I did there? Taking flight.
We did, yeah.
We wanted to work on. So we wanted to promote planting native and discouraging planting non-native, like the things that you can get at big box stores. We wanted to change behaviors around planting, and we wanted to provide additional habitat for endangered butterflies. So we as in kids came up with the idea to put in a corridor with our families, and we have families from Marco Island up to Fort Myers. So we sold plants, we sold plant bundles, and then the families planted at their homes. And so we ended up with 89 gardens between that area. So basically Collier County, all of Collier County and into Lee County, connecting those habitats. So a butterfly can stop off and have a little snack all the way from Fort Myers down to Marco. And so we had about 1,000 new plants go in and 89 gardens and a digital map that's really neat. So the address would go into the digital map, and if you hover over it, the butterfly shows. And the education behind it was like the physical iteration of the gardens was wonderful, but the education behind it was great because kids could say, hey, if you plant native, you don't have to use the fertilizers. You don't need to use the herbicides. You don't have to water so much, which makes our groundwater cleaner. So it was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
It's really great.
If I can jump in and kind of set the stage for Jimmy and Jerry's project, is our mission with the Everglades Foundation is to restore and protect America's Everglades through science education and advocacy. And so by using the Earth 4 6-step community action and problem solving process, we wanted these teachers to conduct at least one project-based civic action that was addressing some of our areas of environmental issues concern that impact the Everglades community. And the overarching topics are like water quality and quantity, invasive species of Florida, habitat degradation, and endangered and threatened species. So Jimmy and her students focused on those endangered and threatened species of Florida.
We actually did habitat degradation, but it maybe would have been better to go with invasive species. But we were thinking if we build habitat that connects with the Everglades, then we're combating habitat degradation.
Yeah. And one of the things I share with these teachers when they start this process, these 4 overarching focus overlap. They are not siloed. And so where they may start and think they're at, habitat loss, they end up in somewhere else, right? As most, and probably both of these teachers can explain and agree that that's happened with most of the teachers that are in our program. And so where their final project goes ends up being maybe in a different category, and that's okay because they all connect.
Yeah, I was thinking that, Jimmy, as you were speaking, and like, what a cool way to illustrate that for your students in real time, that all of these things are connected and that systems thinking is really like baked into the approach.
Yes.
Jerry, how was your project? What did you all do?
All right. So our school is about 2 blocks away from Hillsborough Bay, which is fed by the Hillsborough River, the watershed for this area and a couple counties around here. And then, of course, Hillsborough Bay feeds into Tampa Bay and beyond. So my question to the students was, what are we going to do about the water quality that's in Hillsborough Bay? And they realized that you can't eat any fish that are caught from there. All of it is impaired at every level, even for recreation, even for running down the sidewalk and breathing the smells that sometimes come out of that water. So it's very evident and obvious to everyone in the community that something needs to be done there. And so they decided to come up with some strategies as to how they might be able to solve some of these problems. They did some research. They talked about mangroves and how important mangroves are for water quality and for shoreline protection. And they also talked about oysters as being a keystone species that can improve water quality and provide habitat for other organisms. One oyster filtering up to 50 gallons of water a day. They thought that was amazing. And so we allowed them to take that path. They were looking at oysters and mangroves kind of simultaneously at one point. And then they decided, oysters is the thing we should go to. And they learned in the process that at one time, the area where our school was Tampa Bay's very first fishing village. Yeah, there's the school bell, emergency escape, but, so they realized that Tampa's very first fishing village was here where our school is located, and that at the time the history books talked about how there were so many mangroves and so much fish in the bay here that one could go down at the end of the day and collect as many oysters as they wanted and pull in as many fish as they wanted. And they just couldn't imagine what that would be like because it's so different now. The oyster shells had been removed for navigational purposes so that boats could come through, and maybe for the sake of building a seawall. But over time, we can see the kind of devastating effects, those externalities that occurred because of removing those oysters from the habitat. And so our students really got into looking up organizations that are already kind of working in this area and other communities around the US and see what they are doing and could we do that here. And it was a lot of fun. And they learned through some guest speakers that we brought to the school the importance of oysters. So we had professors from the University of Tampa, which is just down the street, some marine biologists come in, some digital storytellers, and Tampa Bay Watch, who came in and taught our students how to build vertical oyster gardens and hang them from docks and bridges and mangroves, and that inside those oyster shells, the spat of the oyster still lives, and that new oysters could colonize. And they found that to be so fascinating that not only did they want to build vertical oyster gardens, but how could we get vertical oyster gardens into the hands of people in the community who live on the water and might be able to deploy them in their backyards. And so we developed a vertical oyster garden adoption station at our school where interested people in the community can scan a QR code, complete a form, adopt our vertical oyster garden, bring it home, take photos, and upload those photos back for some citizen science data later on. So that's kind of like a quick summary of the project there.
Yeah, y'all, both of those sound so cool. I wish I could have done that when I was a student, something like that. And Jerry, you're keying in on like that first part of your story where you were talking about how students are noticing that this water is not usable, you can't eat the fish, and that's keying into that lived experience piece that we talk about, that students are going to get involved and start caring about and be really excited to do something that matters to them and their community. And that's so cool the way that you were able to illustrate that.
Thank you. It was fun.
Yeah.
It's a great project. It's a great project.
I'd be curious, and y'all both hit on this a little bit, but like, what are some pieces that as you were going through this process with your students that you really saw them kind of come into their voice? Like, and when we talk about youth voice, that's young people having responsibility to make decisions and take action and get into that civic engagement piece. What are some pieces of either of your projects where you really saw your students getting into that stride?
So one of my favorite parts was seeing the middle school students work with the upper school students, work with the community partners, work with our administration. So when you have, those different people in the room, then it kind of brings everyone up. Like everyone is wanting to have the great ideas and share, but they also kind of zero in on their own strengths. Like there were times when we really needed kids to be concise, and middle school kids are not great at being concise. And so they started honing in on, because in a video, we can't have a 20-minute video. We need like a 5-minute video. So taking out the things that weren't necessary and sticking with the meat and potatoes. And they did such a good job of, removing the extra. And that's hard. That's really hard for that age. And they just shined. By the end, it was really obvious who we needed to go to when we wanted to be concise. We figured out who we needed to go to when we needed help with our website, who we needed, and all students. Like, this was done by students. We did have, like, our IT department, we had people help, but they just mentored the students. They didn't do it for the students. It was all student built. And so seeing them come into their own, like, figure things out on their own, and also just make their own decisions. There were times when we had, forks, like, which way do we go? And seeing them kind of duke it out a little bit. There were never arguments, but they would have opposing views, and they would have to, defend why they wanted to do what. And then in the end, they typically picked whatever would have the most lasting effect. Which is really great.
Nothing like a good old debate and discussion.
Yeah, lots of really good discussion.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yes.
I also loved, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, jump in.
I was going to say, I also just loved seeing them outside. We spent a lot of time outside. We went to the native plant stores. We visited gardens. We did a garden here on campus. They came to my house because I have a big butterfly garden. And so seeing kids outside without their phones was pretty fabulous.
That's awesome. Yeah, so for us, having an aquaculture course and an ag communications course, and the ability for those two classes to work together on a project made a lot of sense for us. So for aquaculture, what kind of aquaculture product could also be an environmental fix, And so oysters really did fit that. And so that worked out really well for our aquaculture students. And then for ag communications, to be able to tell that story through all different types of media outlets and online and digital tools was really gave them, a path to focus on. And I would say that the criteria that the Everglades Foundation presented with us really gave us the guidelines to follow and some, deadlines. And so that really motivated them. But there were times, where we ran into some obstacles. We were told in order to build oyster reef orbs, oyster reef balls, which are larger concrete oyster structures, that they would have to be 16 years old to go through the training. And so there were issues like that, and like permitting, and that really kind of frustrated them at certain points. And so my role in the process, seemed to be, trying to solve those kind of problems along the way. And, there's, certain moments where they're like, Mr. C, can we really make a difference here? There's, we're just kids, and there's so many obstacles. And so when we were told we couldn't, go through the training on how to build oyster reef orbs, I just went out and we bought our own through a grant that we received. And so, although that wasn't a part of the project in the first year, we were more focused on the vertical oyster gardens. This year, we get to scale that up and move on to the bigger oyster reef orbs that now we have the molds and we can make as many as we want. So, those types of solutions and then working with people who already have permits gave us time so that our permitting could be approved. And then people, strategically inviting me to dinners where I would be sitting next to people in the city who make these kind of decisions, and then getting, a face-to-face conversation and having permitting fees waived. Those kind of moments were huge for our students to say, hey, we could do this. There is a path for us. We just have to persevere. Yeah.
And like, we get questions all the time around like, okay, if young people are taking the lead, what is then my role as the adult or as the educator? And Jerry, I think you hit it perfectly. Like, when you run into just some like, red tape permitting kind of stuff, that is the perfect place for you as the adult to just like take care of that, so then that young people can really shine and take the lead on the parts of the project that really matter, instead of dealing with like these formalities and the infrastructure that we as adults kind of just have to like deal with.
Yeah, and jumping in here, when I work with these amazing teachers, we really emphasize, and I really emphasize with them, that they're the facilitator and the students are leading this process, and that these teachers have to kind of let go of the reins a little bit to see where this process takes these kids, because they're not going to really know where their end project goes. when you give them the opportunity to see where what happens with it, right? Guiding them, the teachers are guiding them and being their cheerleader for these students for Ask for Change, which they may have never even thought that they could be these change makers in their communities. Like Jerry was mentioning, like, how can we make this impact? And then the ideas started building on top of each other as they kept going through this process. And really the only limitations, I think, for both of these teachers and the teachers we work with is time, so that these teachers, they'll want to continue this process. We have students asking teachers, hey, when are we going to work back on that Everglades project that we did last year? So which is telling us that we're doing something right to get these kids engaged. Like, they want to learn, they want to be part of something, and having this collective action together to make change. And they're sharing that with their fellow students, and it's building this sense of community. It's pretty awesome to see how much change they're making in their across the state.
Yeah, it almost feels like they're skipping being students, even college students, and they're going straight to what it's like to problem solve as an adult in the real world, because they're working in committees and they're making decisions together, based on research. So it's such an adult skill. It's such a great skill that will serve them forever. And they're standing up for things that they believe in, which is also something that, is often skipped as we go through school. We just do the math, we do the science, we do the English, and sometimes forget about our purpose in the community.
Yeah, sometimes project-based learning can be so foreign to students. They're so accustomed to a lecture style of learning when they get into middle and high school. And at one point, we're working on the Everglades project, and students said, Mr. C, we have an exam coming up, and you haven't taught us anything. I'm like, guys, you've been learning by doing all year long. And when they, almost every one of them got an A on the final exam. I think it was maybe 2 Bs. And they were amazed that, yeah, we really did learn by doing. And it was unfamiliar to us. So that was cool to see.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Y'all, thanks so much for sharing those stories. We really appreciate it. And it's been so cool to hear your reflections, not only about the project, like not just like literally what you did, but the skills that your students learned and the process as a whole, and how that brought up like the caliber of the experience that your students were able to have. So that's really awesome. Thank you for everything that you do. And thanks for coming on to our little show to share about it. We appreciate you so much.
Of course. Thank you.
Yeah,
and I'm still having parents, when parents see me, they'll say, I have butterflies, or I have cocoons. They say cocoons, but I have chrysalis. So they're still so happy, when they see me. I like that I'm associated with butterflies now.
That's
and so
awesome.
are the kids.
Yeah. Amazing. Yes. And what a thing for students to have like in their memory boxes as they do go and blossom into adulthood.
And we share with these teachers that they're part of these students creating a legacy that's left behind at their school, as part of this project or in their community. And especially like our seniors, right? Like they're leaving that chapter and moving on to a next one, and they can be like, okay, I have these set of skills and I can further use them, and I've left this legacy project at my middle or high school. So it's really awesome to see, and the work they have. And we're excited to see what Jerry and Jimmy do for this year. It's an annual program for us, so they're going to end up creating more change in their communities with the next batch of students they have, and we're looking forward to that.
So what I'm hearing is we'll have you back on the podcast in a year to tell us more about it. Maybe bring a few students with you next time, and we can hear about it from their perspective.
Ooh, that'd be fun.
That would be awesome.
Yeah.
I would love that.
All right, y'all. Thanks so much.
So nice to see you.